Welcome to the November 4th, 2021 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:04. First, we're going to go through our roll call. Gillian, I know, is going to be absent tonight. Jeff Fleschauer.
Here.
Frank Jones, I know he's going to be absent tonight. Joel Tomlin.
Here.
And Jonathan Langley, I am present. Staff?
Just one announcement tonight, that the Tennessee American Planning Association training is tomorrow from 8 to noon. Please attend virtually to maintain your 4 required annual hours of training. Thank you.
So if you guys didn't see that email, give me a shout and I can send that to you, but it came in email form, so. All right, so next we're going to consider approval of the minutes from the October 7th, 2021 meeting. Is there a motion?
Second.
Motion made by Jeff, seconded by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
No one's opposed, so minutes are approved. Are there any citizen comments? Okay, we'll go through just to kind of set the stage here. So we'll go through each item. So if you want to speak on an individual item, most individuals in here have probably filled out a speaker card. If you haven't, feel free to fill that out. But we have those for items 3 and 5 currently. So we'll go through those as we go through each item. Is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close public comment.
Motion made by Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, the public comment's closed. So we'll move to item number 1. It's a variance request to not provide 7 new parking spaces required for a building addition in the DD district at the property located at 408 Main Street. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All 5 items tonight are reviewed in light of the 3 criteria as established by state law. Those criteria are criteria number 1, where by reason of exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific piece of property at the time of the enactment of the zoning ordinance, or by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or other extraordinary and exceptional situation or condition, such a piece of property is not able to accommodate development as required under the ordinance. Criteria 2 states, the strict application of any provision enacted under the zoning ordinance would result in peculiar and exceptional practical difficulties to, or exceptional or undue hardship upon the owner of the property. And finally, criteria 3 states, such relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. As stated, item number 1 is a variance request to not provide 7 new parking spaces as required for a building addition in the DD district. The property located at 408 Main Street is commonly known as Red Pony. In January 2021, a fire occurred that damaged the interior of the building and destroyed the rear deck off of the 2nd floor, which was used for dining space. Prior to the fire, the area under the deck included fenced outdoor space that housed the restaurant's walk-in coolers and storage space. Now the applicant is seeking to enclose that space to expand the kitchen, but the zoning ordinance requires 7 additional parking spaces for the addition. The applicant has received a certificate of appropriateness from the Historic Zoning Commission to enclose and expand the 1st floor kitchen space. This plan is dependent upon the BZA's approval of the variance request. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 required criteria as established by state law. In regards to the first criteria, the parcel is located in a larger series of connected buildings along Main Street. The building footprint and the deck prior to the fire covered most of the subject parcel, which makes on-site parking difficult to accommodate. Staff believes the uniqueness of Main Street parcels compared to other commercial properties represents a unique condition, and this criteria is met. The second criteria requires exceptional practical difficulties or undue hardship if the zoning ordinance were to be followed. Per the zoning ordinance, the enclosure of the expanded kitchen space below the deck represents an addition to the building, which triggers the need for additional parking spaces. The zoning ordinance does allow for an alternative parking plan per FZO 10.1.10. The practical difficulties of creating new parking on the site means the applicant can seek remote parking. The remote parking must be recorded in an easement and within 1,320 feet or a 5-minute walk from the subject parcel. But the applicant has stated that he cannot find a property owner who will rent the required parking spaces in perpetuity as required by the zoning ordinance. Therefore, staff believes this represents a practical difficulty and the criteria is met. In regards to the final criteria about the intent of the zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance does state when a building is expanded, additional parking spaces are required for the new square footage only. The applicant is seeking to expand the expand the kitchen space on the subject property, but not the dining space. The applicant has stated that the kitchen expansion is for more space, but they do not intend to hire more employees based on the expansion. Therefore, parking for employees on the largest shift will not change from before January 2021. Given that the expansion would be used as kitchen space for employees that does not increase the parking demand, staff believes this criteria can be granted without impairing the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance and therefore is met. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for this item? If you could step forward for us and just state your name for the record.
Hello, Remick Moore, architect, representing Jason McConnell.
Chuck Ingram, Branch Building Group, general contractor.
Okay. If you guys could just give us an overview of kind of the project and, respond maybe to the 3 variance request items or the criteria that we're looking at as a board anyway.
Sure, yeah. So, as you know, after the fire, we sought to not only put back what was there, but enhance some of the function of the kitchen below, and so that's what's triggered sort of wanting to enclose and condition the space underneath the dining, and so that's what triggered the extra parking.
Okay. I know staff has exhibits up. If you wanted to point anything out specific on the submitted items, feel free to have them moved in exhibit.
Yeah, this is your application package.
Yeah, it's, I mean, like I said, we've been through, or like she mentioned, we've been through with historic and gotten their certificate of appropriateness on the architectural elements here, and they've approved us to enclose that from an architectural standpoint. And so, yeah, we're just seeking the parking variance so that we can build it back and get him back open and running.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your comments. Are there any citizen comments next? All right. Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close public
Motion made-
comments.
Motion made by Joel. Is there a second? Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, the public comment on this item is closed. All right, so you guys are good. We'll discuss as a board and then kind of work through a motion as well.
Great.
Any questions from the board? Okay. I'm ready to entertain a motion if you guys are ready.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance request to not provide 7 new parking spaces required for a building addition in the DD district at the property located at 408 Main Street because the criteria required for granting a variance have been met.
Okay, motion for approval made by Joel. Is there a second?
second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, item number 1 is passed. So the variance request is approved. All right, so next we'll move to item number 2. It's going to be a variance request for development within the landscape buffer at the property located at 2019 Oak Leaf Circle. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 2 is a variance request to develop within the landscape buffer to build a pool and patio at 2019 Orange Leaf Circle, which is in the October Park subdivision. The lot has a 37.5-foot incompatible lot size landscape buffer located in the rear yard. The applicant is seeking to build a pool and patio within this portion of the buffer. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 criteria required as established by state law. Criteria 1 requires uniqueness in shape or topography of the lot in question, which prevents the zoning ordinance to be followed as written. The parcel is located in a cul-de-sac that is shallower on the left rear than on the right, and the applicant has cited topographic issues in the rear yard as reason for wanting to construct the pool on the right side of the parcel. Moving the proposed location, on the left side of the parcel. Moving the proposed location to the right would result in additional excavation and the need for more retaining walls. Therefore, staff believes this criteria is met. In regards to criteria 2, moving the pool out of the landscape buffer would require retaining walls, which is a practical difficulty given the topography of the parcel. The proposed placement of the pool and patio in the rear yard would otherwise be permitted on the lot if not for the platted incompatible lot size buffer, but the buffer has no required landscape screening in the proposed location. Therefore, staff believes this criteria is met. The final criteria requires that relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance. The intent of the buffer is to provide landscaping on smaller lots to screen them from larger adjacent residential lots that existed prior to the development. As proposed, the pool and pool patio would not remove any landscaping from the buffer. Because the zoning ordinance does allow for pools and rear yards in the proposed location, if not for that landscape buffer, and because the applicant is not removing any current landscape screening from the buffer to construct the pool and patio, relief may be granted without impairing the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. So staff believes this criteria is met. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for this item?
Yes.
Okay. If you can just step forward for us and state your name for the record.
I'm John Harvey with Franklin Stone. We're the builder.
Jake Neville's the property owner.
Okay. If you can kind of explain the item for us and then also go through the 3 criteria that staff's looking at for
Sure.
the
Yeah,
item.
I think it pretty well stated by staff too. So the project is centered on the back of the property, as in the drawing. It does, of course, encroach into the incompatible buffer. The lot is an odd-shaped lot, being much shallower on the left side, so that impacts where the piece of the project does impact the buffer. Moving that in, to the right, if you will, slides it into the grade, which would require a significant amount of additional retaining wall, which would impact cost pretty dramatically. Thus the hardship portion of the statute. And then lastly, as we are removing no part of the existing landscaping that has been provided in that buffer, we don't feel that it impacts any of the surrounding properties or the intent of the code.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. So next we'll go to public comment. Are there any citizen comments on this item? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment? Motion made by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, the public comment's closed. Any questions from the board at all? Okay. Ready to entertain a motion if you guys are ready.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a motion to approve the variance request for development within the landscape buffer at the property located at 2019 Orange Leaf Circle because the criteria required for granting a variance have been met.
Okay, motion for approval made by Jeff, or not Jeff, Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, item number 2 is approved.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're up to item number 3. It's going to be a variance request for a 95-foot encroachment into the required 150-foot front yard setback to construct a new office residential building and construct 14 parking spaces behind the building within the Franklin Road Scenic Corridor overlay, and that's for the property at 532 Franklin Road. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 3 is a variance request to encroach 95 feet in the required 150-foot front yard setback in the Franklin Road Scenic Corridor overlay. The applicant is seeking the request in order to construct a new office residential building and 14 parking spaces on the parcel located at 532 Franklin Road. This parcel received an amendment to the Envision Franklin Plan in 2020, which changed the parcel from large lot residential to office residential. And then the parcel underwent rezoning in 2021 and was rezoned from R1 district to office residential district. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 criteria as established by state law. The first of which requires uniqueness in shape or topography of the lot in question or some other extraordinary situation. The parcel is much shallower by approximately 50% than adjacent lots on either side as well as along the corridor. The floodplain along the rear and part of the left side of the parcel limit the buildable space for a new office residential building. The exceptional shallowness as well as the floodplain create an exceptional condition on the property. Therefore, staff believes that this criteria is met. The second criteria requires exceptional practical difficulties. The minimum front yard setback for properties in the Franklin Road SCO is 150 feet per Franklin zoning ordinance 4.9.3. The subject parcel is approximately 170 feet deep. The minimum rear yard setback for the OR district is 30 feet per Franklin zoning ordinance 3.11.5. The setbacks for both the front yard and rear yard do not result in any buildable area for redevelopment on this lot, which represents an exceptional practical difficulty, and staff believes that this criteria is met. The final criteria requires that relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance has a 150-foot SCO setback along Franklin Road. The SCO exempts residential lots that are under a certain lot size. In those cases, the underlying zoning district provides the minimum setback, but this lot does not fall under that exemption because it has been rezoned for office use. However, the intent is for the underlying setback to apply to houses, and the OR district requires a house building form. For OR districts, the front yard setback is context-based in relation to the closest adjacent building. The adjacent property is set back approximately 61 feet. If the proposed building at 532 Franklin Road is built as the building footprint is shown on the submitted plan, then the setbacks generally match. The proposed location of the building and rear parking behind the building as shown on the plan are keeping with the intent of the OR context, but the requested front yard setback line as drawn on the plan shows a shallower setback than the proposed building footprint. In order to keep with the intent of the zoning ordinance, staff recommends that the new building does not encroach into the setback any further than the building footprint as it is shown on the plan, because the plan shows that development can be accommodated without further encroachment into the setback. If this condition is met, staff believes the criteria is met. And I will say, staff did receive one public comment via email against this variance request, as well as one public comment via email in favor of this variance request, which were provided to you all via email a day prior to the meeting, and it's also available at your seats now. So based on this analysis, staff recommends conditional approval of the variance request, and the condition is as follows. The building footprint shall not encroach into the setback further than the building footprint as shown on the submitted plan. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for this item?
I'm Paul Lebovitz. I'm the applicant representing the owner.
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks for the exhibits too, that helps.
Okay. So this was a little unique. The city wanted to do this scenic overlay, and this is the last house. They stopped it on Country Lane. That happens to be, as she said, this lot is 50% less as deep as everything else all the way down to almost Machatcha. It's just a small farm lot that's left over. And so what happened with this overlay is the overlay pretty much ate the property up. And if you do the math simply in your head, the lot's 190 feet deep, and you take off 150 foot on the front, that leaves you 40 feet, 30 foot on the back, and you end up with the lot that's 10 feet. So, sorry, it's not, I'll carry this up here, but that's 150 feet, and that's the 30-foot rear. So, that's what we're down to, basically. I didn't outline the floodplain, it's right here. So that was one of the circumstances, is that you don't really even have it's 200 foot deep, actually, but you don't have the full use of the
Paul,
property.
I don't think you're being picked up on the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Could you please
Yeah.
stand at the microphone? I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. So the lot's 200 feet deep, and if you took off the 150 foot, that leaves you 50 feet, and then take 30 out of that, it leaves you a 20-foot strip where you're saying a house or a business could be built on this property. And that's not really practical. So we've asked that and staff agreed that we asked that the overlay be taken off. It actually, the overlay pretty much works with everything else going south, and this property and the street next to it, Country Lane, that's where the overlay ends. We're the last piece there. We're the only piece that's got this short of frontage to it. The back of the property does have some floodplain, as outlined by staff. And if you grant us the setback in line with the next house to the north, I'm sorry, let's see, it's on this one. It works. As they described, that's fine with us. That's where I set the building on this illustration here. It's approximately about 60 or 65 feet actually off the property line. So we're asking that you, and the third thing is, will there be any detriment to the public? There's no detriment to moving it. As it is right now, the 150-foot setback, there's a building on the property, and the 150 feet goes behind the building on the property. It's all just sort of an odd deal, to tell you the truth. So we're asking that you approve the variance so that the owner can build a building that is agreeable to all of the statutes of the city of Franklin.
Thanks. So next we'll move to citizen comments. I'll mention this now, kind of before we get to the next item also. Per the bylaws, per item, we have 7 minutes per side. So I don't think on item 3 we have 2 speaker cards up here. On item 5, we have enough time to get through those, but just keep in mind we've got 7 minutes to discuss an item. So 7 minutes for, 7 minutes against. So staff will time those items when we get to item number 5, but just keep that in mind as you speak. Make it, kind of to the point, and try not to repeat those items so that everybody who signed up on a speaker card has that time to speak at least. So saying that, any citizen comments on item 3? I know I have a speaker card for, and I apologize if I'm messing names up here, but Carrie McCullough.
That's right.
Okay.
No, that's correct. So I had initially wanted to express my opposition to this variance, but I appreciate the staff's clarifying exactly what we're talking about there. And what I was concerned about was getting closer to Franklin Road than what it already is. And clearly, I appreciate the staff pointing out and drawing in there that it would be within the footprint of the current building there.
Okay.
And so, and the parking would be behind that, not in front of it. And so, so I don't have any objections at this point for what he's going to do with that property. I'm good with it. Yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks for your comments.
Staff would just like to clarify, the new building footprint as proposed would be closer to Franklin Road.
Okay,
As the applicant stated, the house that is there right now, yes, it is within that 150-foot front yard setback, but the new OR building, as it is shown on the applicant's plans, is even closer to Franklin Road.
okay. I think,
And to follow up on that, one more statement. The statement that Victoria made in the report was that the house where it's proposed with this footprint that you see on the screen today is generally in line with the adjacent houses that front Franklin Road. So it's in keeping with that particular setback.
okay, so if we looked at the existing, footprint where the condition of approval on this item, it would keep that in line with the adjacent home. Okay. All right, so I also have a speaker card for Ms. Margaret Martin.
Thank you. Margaret Martin, Alderman's 4th Ward, until Tuesday night. This property was recently rezoned by the Planning Commission and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen without batting an eye. And that really disturbed me because this is, the history behind this is really very critical, I think, to the city of Franklin. When Tollgate Village was developed, we were told that it would not creep down Franklin Road, that Franklin Road would still remain the open corridor with the large lots. And this is not happening. You've seen what's happened down Franklin Road with all the office buildings. And this is one little spot. It's very small, but it's creeping right down. And this is really a spot zoning. And I regret that the board and the planning commission didn't know the history of this before they voted on it. I know that's not, it's already rezoned OR, but I just hate to see you do anything that's going to enhance it as an office residential corridor. We don't really need this coming down to McHatcher, and it's going to. Every little thing that happens, that's the way you do it, just a little bit at a time. And first thing you know, Franklin Road's going to be developed. And I hope that we will be very careful about this. And I would ask you to deny this, tongue-in-cheek, because I know that you have to deny it if the staff recommends it. But I just want you to be aware that this is going to creep right down Franklin Road. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I believe that's all we had on item 3. Were there any speakers that we missed in the audience? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
I make a motion to close the public comment.
Motion made by Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye. Aye. Seeing no one opposed, public comment's closed. I have one question for staff, and it relates, so we've got a condition of approval that it's basically, so the original item is, and it relates to dimensions, so I'll get you on that kind of train of thought.
Okay.
So the variance request is for a 95-foot encroachment. The recommended condition of approval is that the building footprint should not encroach into the setback further than the building footprint shown on the submitted plan. Do we feel good that we know which plan we're referring to and what those dimensions are?
This attached page that you see before you is the only plan as part of the submittal that shows the building footprint and the requested setback
Okay.
variance.
I just want to make sure if because the request is 95 foot, but the condition would reduce that. So I want to make sure, do we know the exact dimensions on that plan?
Here's the basics, if you don't mind me saying, is that we're
Paul, if
really,
you could-
we can't go.
Paul, if you could step to the mic,
sorry.
please. Thank you.
We can't go forward past the house to the north. That's our setback. And that's pretty much what was written in here. So if the house to the, across Country Lane is 91 or 95 feet, excuse me, it's less than that. It's 55 or 61 feet from the property line then on Franklin Road, then we're the same distance back.
Okay. I think I'm good with the condition of approval if we know where that firm boundary is and we feel comfortable as staff.
I'm going to say it's 66 feet.
66 feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I measure off the map, well, actually, I have GIS maps from the city, and when I measure off those, it came out 66 feet from the front property line.
Well, we don't have the specific setback on a survey. That was what we roughly measured from the plan as well.
Okay.
Either about 12 feet back
So if
from
you-
the 55
If
feet.
you wanted to word the motion that we have to have a survey of the setbacks to the north, you can do that, because that's what's all based on. And that's how, the code's written that way, that we're supposed to look at adjacent setbacks. That's what,
Okay.
Which this submitted plan puts it in that range right here, this one plan that's been submitted.
Have thoughts, Bill, on dimensions, at least going off the plan? I mean, I think, so I've heard mentioned, I want to just be real clear about what dimension we're voting on. So I've heard 66 feet from the applicant. We've got a plan that we're looking at that probably has rough dimensions on it, I'm guessing.
Well, I think the answer to your question, if you're asking me, how do you approach this? Really, in order to make a motion to take an action, you need to have at least a firm grasp of what it is that you are voting on. It sounds to me as though there is a reasonable understanding of what that is, even if it is not exactly specifically defined tonight. If you wanted to include the requirement of a survey to firm up that number, I think you could do that. I think that's well within decision-making authority for you.
Okay.
But I think ultimately, in terms of whether you have the information you need, you should probably take that answer from staff, because they're the ones that will review the plans. And if they need something else, they should feel free to let you know that as well.
Okay. So do you guys feel comfortable? I guess that's the question kind of before we get to the motion. Do you guys feel comfortable with the exhibit and the condition of approval?
Yes, we feel comfortable with it.
Okay.
It appears to be about 12 feet, and that's in keeping with the house
Okay.
on the other side of Country Lane.
Other questions from board members? I've hogged the time up here, so. Okay.
I'm good.
All right, I'm ready to entertain a motion, if the board's ready.
I'd like to move to approve with staff condition a variance for encroachment into the required 150-foot front yard setback to construct a new office residential building and construct 14 parking spaces behind the building within the Franklin Road scenic corridor overlay for the property located at 532 Franklin Road.
Would you like to add that condition in there, Joel?
And including the condition that the adjacent property at 536 Franklin Road be surveyed in order to determine the distance from the property line to the building, and that the new proposed building at 532 Franklin Road meet the same condition as 536 Franklin Road.
Okay, motion for approval with the condition made. Is there a second? Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, motion passes with condition.
thank you. Yes, sir.
So next we'll move to item number 4. It's a variance request for a parking structure along Columbia Avenue rather than the required building screening at the property located at 731 through 735 Columbia Avenue. So that's one variance request. And then there's a second one associated with the property. It's a variance request for multifamily residential buildings along a street frontage to not have a ground floor commercial use along the street frontage at that same address, 731 through 735 Columbia Avenue. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 4 is a variance request for a parking structure along Columbia Avenue and a variance request for multifamily residential buildings to not have ground floor commercial uses along the street frontage. The applicant is seeking these two variances as part of a larger development project along 731 through 735 Columbia Avenue. Those proposed plans include preserving the Handy Hardware Building, adding new retail space, the construction of multifamily condos, and placing parking within a parking structure. The parcel is located within the Columbia Avenue overlay, which requires commercial space along the street frontage. Both the parking structure and multifamily residences, as proposed, do not have commercial uses at the street level. Staff wants to note that the engineering department reached out with a statement, and they have said, the location of the entrance to the parking garage proposed on Columbia Avenue, which is an arterial roadway, does not comply with the transportation and technical street specifications for access control. The applicant has indicated that they will apply for a variance for the access point to be located less than 100 feet from South Margin Street, which is a separate process that is reviewed by the Building and Street Standards Board of Appeals. The outcome of this variance request bears no outcome on the variance request for access. So that is from our engineering department. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 required criteria as established by state law. In regard to criteria 1, the subject parcel has 3 frontages along Columbia Avenue, South Margin Street, and Cummins Street. The lot is also shallow at approximately 160 feet deep. The existing 2-story historic building, for which the CA01 was modeled after, has frontage on all 3 streets with surface parking to the interior side of the building. The shallowness of the property, as well as the 3 frontages, represent an exceptional situation, and staff believes this criterion is met. In regards to criteria 2, the applicant has stated that the requirement to add more commercial square footage to satisfy the frontage causes the site to lose parking spaces, while simultaneously creating the need to add additional parking spaces to accommodate the additional space. The applicant has stated that subgrade parking is not a preferred option because of their plan to preserve the Handy Hardware Building for adaptive reuse. The use of subgrade parking could endanger the historic building, and preserving the Handy Hardware Building is important because the COA1 is modeled after this building. Therefore, staff believes this criteria is met. And in regard to criteria 3, the purpose of both FCO 10.1.9B and FZO 5.1.4N is to create activated streets with uses along the street frontages, not parking. As proposed, parking areas and entrances to parking would be along the streets with multifamily uses above on the 2nd floor. And while the property is shallow, the site already accommodates development under the zoning ordinance, but may be able to be redesigned with less intensity that better meets the intent of the zoning ordinance. Furthermore, discussions with city engineering staff has raised concerns about potential stacking along Columbia Avenue as a result of the new parking structure and the proposed access points. Therefore, staff believes granting such relief may cause substantial detriment to the public good. Based on this analysis, staff recommends denial of the variance request because the criteria for granting a variance are not met. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for this item? If you could state your name for us, that would help us out in the minutes.
Yeah, my name's Adam Sager. I'm the civil engineer on the project, and
I'm Matt Taylor of Studio 8 Design, the architect for the project.
want to go over a few things on this variance request. And two things that we want to convey very clearly is that we have a very unique property. It's not like some of the other properties in the downtown area, and we care very deeply about keeping the Handy Hardware building. We do want to keep this building. It's a building that everybody likes, but also I want to keep in mind that this is not a building that's on the historic registry. It's not in a historic overlay. It's just a nice, cool-looking old building. And so we have worked hard on this project for almost a year now. We've worked with staff. Staff has been great to work with. And we are really trying hard to stay in every single detail of the code and the overlay, the Columbia Avenue overlay. And so as we meet with staff, we find out, well, you know, to stay in the overlay and the zoning ordinance, you might need to do this and do that. And we've changed things over time, and then we ended up with this plan. And so the premise of our variance request is that, like staff mentioned, the site itself is so narrow, is so shallow, that it's very difficult to get a parking on there, much less for Handy Hardware, or to develop it, much less for Handy Hardware itself. And so we have to be creative in keeping every parking space we can. We care very deeply about keeping those parking spaces, not just to meet code, but for the viability of the project. I think we might be one of the first people to test the ordinance overlay since the ordinance was readopted in 2020 along this strip. And staff, if we can go back to the slide that shows kind of the colored overall mapping of the, there you go. So if you look at that strip, I even brought my handy little laser. This strip over here on the right side, that's Columbia Avenue going down through there. And keep in mind, Columbia Avenue is meant to be commercial. It's meant to have activation along the streets. And so you can walk down Columbia Avenue. And the properties on the left, where the police, the bank, and all of those guys are, you see how wide those are? On the left side of Columbia Avenue. And on the right side, you see how narrow those are? And on the right side of those properties is Cummins Street. And if you drive down Cummins Street right now, on the right side or the east side of the street, you're going to find duplex, some old houses that have been turned into businesses, and residents that live there today. And so as you're walking down Cummins Street, on that side you see houses. You see a duplex. You see an old house. And on the left side, on the west side, you see dumpsters, parking, old businesses. So with this project, we also want to reactivate Cummins Street. We want to have more symmetry to it. On the left side, we want to see building frontages, and on the right side, we have building frontages. We don't want it to just have one side of the street looking at the parking lot on the other side of the street. That also coincides with the overlay, which asks us to put buildings all along the street frontage. And so we come to this property where, if you can go back to the overall, go up one more. Yeah, that'll work. So you can see Columbia, Margin, and Cummins. We have a very short space, a very short distance to go from commercial on Columbia and then to transition over to Cummins, which is predominantly residential or office right now. And so we're trying to fit all of this in there and develop the property. That's why this parking is so important. And so what we propose to do, and can we go down to the last slide? I think this shows it best what we're proposing. The one with the color. Yeah, perfect. So there's the Handy Hardware building. That's what it looks like today. And on the left side of Handy Hardware is an open parking lot. We're not looking to disrupt the parking lot or anything about it, but rather build the facade over the top of it. It's not too much different than what you see on the 2nd Avenue or 4th Avenue parking garage right now. But what we would do is, there it is, have a business office over the top, and underneath, that's the same parking lot. We're just trying to make it look better on the facade. The interpretation by staff is that that constitutes a parking structure. And in the overlay, it talks about they don't want parking structures up on the street, and it has to be set back. So like staff mentioned, we kind of have this catch-22. If we have to make that section a building, we're required to do more parking while taking parking away at the very same time. So it creates a real challenge for us, and we want to keep Handy Hardware. And I want to be clear that it's not a historic building, it's not an historic overlay, and the only way to make this site work, if we cannot get this variance, is to do an underground parking garage to get enough parking to make it all work. Therefore, I don't think the Handy Hardware building would survive if we have to do an underground parking garage. One other thing to note, we're very proud to work for our client on this. He's looking to do a long-term investment at this property. We want to make this corner look beautiful for the next 200 years. They are willing to go down Cummins Street, and we are now exploring to bury the overhead utility poles. So we're looking to make this whole side, all of Cummins, Margin, and Columbia, to have building frontage and to make it look beautiful. And so one other thing I want to mention is that you did talk, staff did mention about engineering and the access point. The access point is close to the intersection of Margin and Columbia. You can see the stoplight in the background, and we are pretty close. It's been there for a long time, but since we are redeveloping, staff looks at that with fresh eyes, and that intersection, the curb cut, is closer to that intersection than what would be allowed if we were like a greenfield development. For that reason, we've talked with engineering since we've even submitted this. We've been working closely with them, and we've talked to them and said the opening, the garage door opening, I'm trying to stay in the mic as well so I can keep talking. The garage door opening down at the bottom where we come off, we are okay if it kind of changes things. We're okay to make that a building facade. The main goal is we can't lose the parking spaces. We can still access them from the other side, and we're okay to close that off and make it a building facade so that cars don't come in and out of there, and therefore the concern about being so close to the intersection, I think, gets alleviated, if that makes a difference. So, and Matt, did you want to speak any more into the architecture or the plan?
I don't think so. I think the main goal is, especially from the Cummins Street side, and that this is walkable to downtown Franklin, that we really are trying to be sensitive to all three sides of this and not just the Columbia Avenue frontage. A lot of the overlay is written very much about the Columbia Avenue exposure and activity that we want to see there. And we're trying to, in a very narrow spot, look at, if you're walking along Cummins now, it's a pretty unfriendly place to walk due to parked cars that are being serviced and left there. So we are really trying to improve this whole section of the neighborhood from the high-density commercial corridor along Columbia to the walkable neighborhood residential side of Cummins Street.
Okay. I think if we could go back, staff, there's the exhibit that shows both blocks. It's kind of the 3D. I went through your package. The illustrations are great connecting all this. So that one right there, that's perfect. So that shows, at least for the board, if you could just walk us through kind of what we were looking at, that garage frontage and the Handy Hardware, kind of where that is on the exhibit, because we're looking at two variances from the board standpoint. So we've got one looking at the parking structure rather than building screening, and then there's a second one looking at the multifamily piece. So we're looking at almost two blocks. If you could just kind of walk us through.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to come over here. It's important to keep in mind that both parcels are part of one project. We have 731 on the right side or the north side and 805 on the left or the south side. To make parking work for this development, we have, and we're coming off of Cummins here because we had a lot of talk about activating Cummins Street. Again, if you remember, there's already houses along Cummins and we're trying to match that. And so you would have a parking entryway right here off of Cummins. It's on the back side that goes down into a parking garage that would be underneath this entire building. So that's where we gain a lot of parking to make this plan work. There is also another access you can't see on Margin Street that comes in right there, and that's at grade parking. So you would have parking under that structure right there at the ground level. So there's parking there. On the 731 Handy Hardware is right here. That's the building that gets preserved. We want to keep that. This is the surface lot right here, and we would basically build over the top of it, that building, and all those parking spaces would remain underneath. And then right here, we would, I'm losing my battery, and off of Margin Street, under the condo units, you would come in and park there for the condos right there. We're also able to introduce on-street parking on Cummins to help out as well. It's the massing, it looks like we're doing a lot. We're not doing a whole lot more. That's 4 or 5 condo units. There is going to be office over the top of the existing parking up on that top corner that he's pointing to. And so the access point that has been discussed to date is the one off of Columbia, and because it's so close to that stoplight. And again, we're willing to close that off because we can drive in off of Cummins or off of Margin and get to those parking spaces. It might help see the layout too if we go, now that you've got that in your mind, if you want to zoom, go up or down, there's, yeah, up one more. There you go. So right there, you're looking at a plan view where you can see, again, starting on the very far left, that would be the parking garage that goes down. That's that ramp that goes down underneath. And then right next to it in orange or pink would be surface level coming off a Margin. And then going across the street over to the Handy Hardware building. The Handy Hardware building's in blue. And you can see where we enter in off of Margin opposite of that and off of Cummins. And you can see the parking spaces. And then the Columbia Avenue access that we've been talking about is up on the top right. And if that were to be just off, put a wall up instead of that access point, cars can't go in and out at that point, but we can still get to those parking spaces by coming in off those other access points.
But architecturally, the upper floors, we feel like, help to bring some activity and eyes to the street all the way around these buildings, rather than just a parking lot with a brick screen wall. And so that we're essentially creating the same kind of screen wall with a floor above it to give it more architectural character, and people at the windows on the upper floors looking down, and lights, coming on and off, and businesses on Columbia, residential on the back. So.
Okay. All right, thank you, guys. So next we'll move to the public comment. Are there any citizen comments on this item? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close.
Motion made by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye. Aye. Seeing no one opposed, the public comment's closed. Any questions from board members? I know we're looking at 2 variance requests, kind of gone through the 3D. Any questions from you guys?
The only question I have is, it appears that the access to the parking on Columbia Avenue, it's in the same spot, right, that it is now? And I know that parking lot well. I just wanted to confirm that it is coming in the same spot. The only difference being essentially just a building facade for looks, and to support that office above it, right? Just confirming that.
Yes, it is in the same location, but when redevelopment is proposed, the expectation is that sites come into compliance with all of the standards and code requirements of today.
Okay.
All right, so based on that, my question to staff is, he was very adamant about potentially closing that entrance off from Columbia Avenue into that parking area. If he was to do that, would that create staff more apt to accept this in compliance?
It would help in order to stop that from being a vehicular access and make it more pedestrian-oriented along the street. But the intent of the ordinance goes back to Envision Franklin, which is to create activated pedestrian streetscapes with businesses and ground floor uses with pedestrian doors for people to interact with and walk up and down the street with. So the intent is for commercial use to be along the ground floor rather than structured parking.
Okay. Thank you.
So to recap that, really the first variance request, because that's what I was thinking in my mind, if they can close it off with that chains of variance requests, but it doesn't, because really that variance is, I guess if it was built to the standards, not looking at the variance, there would be commercial space fronting Columbia Avenue right there. So if it's a wall, it's not a commercial space, and that's staff's position on that. Okay. If there are no other questions, I'm ready to entertain a motion. We've got it's two items, so let's take each variance request one by one. So let's start with a variance request for parking structure along Columbia Avenue rather than the required building screening for the property. So let's start with that variance. Ready to entertain a motion on that first variance request.
Yes, at this point, I move to deny the variance request for a parking structure along Columbia, rather than the required building screening and the variance request for the multifamily residential building along the street frontage, to not have ground floor commercial use along the street frontage at the property located at 731 through 735 Columbia Avenue, because the criteria are not met.
Okay, so motion made by Jeff to deny that first variance request. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Joel. Any discussion? I'll just note, I'm torn on this item. I see both sides of it. I think there is a challenge with parking. It's a brand-new plan that just came out, so I feel like it's been looked at quite a bit. But I do struggle with existing sites, especially along this block. It's a transition block for me. So motion made, second. Any other discussion at all?
Well, and if we could create, now, of course, I'm not the designer, but obviously if you could create some commercial access at that point, maybe split that parking lot in half, I would think they would be more apt to.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I said, obviously, if you were to create a commercial access on the first floor there other than parking, even if you were to split that in half, that would be more apt to comply with the zoning.
Can I make a statement on that, or say something, or is that not appropriate?
We're already in a motion, so we're kind of past that point, but
I think it speaks to point one in the staff comments, though, about creating the need for parking, but taking space away from it.
yep, so we've got a motion already made on the floor. So we've had some discussion, so let's take a vote now. So all in favor of denying the variance request, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? So I'll be the contrarian. I'm opposed to this. So first variance request, it passes for denial 2-1. So now we'll move to the second variance request. It's for multifamily buildings, multifamily residential buildings along a street frontage to not have ground floor commercial uses along the street frontage at 731 to 735 Columbia Avenue. Ready to entertain a motion if the board's ready. Questions at all from board members?
I mean, is it the same thing, essentially? It's confusing a little bit to me how they work together.
Yeah, because I don't have the motion in front of me either, so.
Could staff kind of just walk through that second one as to what that specific variance is for?
Could you pull up the floor plan? Yes. So the multifamilies on the back side of this building that faces Cummins Street, and the requirement in the ordinance is for not just to have multifamily use there, but to have ground floor retail when it, or commercial use when it faces a street. So again, the intent of this particular provision of the ordinance is to create activated streetscapes and mixed uses along downtown streets.
So we're looking at the Cummins Street section now, right? We're looking
Yes.
at those residential units along Cummins
Right.
as opposed to commercial uses.
Yes.
So they are, it may be combined as far as the project goes, but it would permit residential on the Cummins side as shown in the exhibits. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And staff's recommendation is what?
Staff's recommendation is to deny, which would not permit residential on Cummins. I think that's kind of what the end result would be.
And it's because it doesn't meet the current standards, right, of the new zoning ordinance.
Correct.
All right, I'd like to move to make a motion to deny the variance request for the multifamily residential buildings along a street frontage to not have ground floor commercial uses along the street frontage at the property located at 731, 730 through 735 Columbia Avenue because the criteria is not met.
Okay, motion for denial made by Joel. Is there a second?
I made the motion, so I can't second it.
Right. I'm not sure. I would, no, I'm not going to second it.
Okay, so we don't have a second on the motion. So I guess at this point,
Unless you want a second.
so at this point, we're backing up, correct, Bill? So if we don't have a second, we would need a motion for approval.
Yes.
Well, if you have a motion with no second, that motion just fails. You're kind of back at ground zero, at the beginning again. So whether the next motion is deny or approve is kind of open. You can do whatever, but what you do know is that the first motion did not have a second to deny.
Yep, so first motion failed due to lack of a second. So is there a motion for approval?
Yes, I make a motion to approve based on what's existing on Cummings Street. I make a motion to approve the residential first floor application.
Okay. I think if you could just clarify so on that variance request,
I don't have it in front of me, but I would love to. Hold on. I make a motion to approve the variance for residential on the first floor of the structure on Cummings Street, based on the existing criteria on Cummings Street.
okay, so motion for approval for that second variance request. Is there a second?
If I may interject for a moment.
Sure.
The proposal includes residential on the second floor, so multifamily on the second floor facing Cummins Street with parking structure on the first floor below the multifamily residential.
Okay?
So the variance request is to not require commercial ground floor space underneath the multifamily
On Cummings
residential.
Street.
Yes, and instead have parking structure.
Okay. With that clarification.
Yeah, can you say that one more time for me, Kelly? Like it's running through, but it's not.
So the proposal that you see before you on the screen is the second floor, if you could, that's the second floor of the building. The first level is parking structure, parking underneath the building on the first floor of that structure. So the variance request is to not require commercial square footage on the ground floor beneath multifamily residential.
Okay, so I make a motion to approve the variance request to have parking on the first floor and multifamily on the second floor on Cumming Street, based on the given criteria that's exhibited on Cumming Street at this time.
Okay, motion made. Is there a second? And I'll second that motion.
I'm
All-
opposed.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that's Jonathan and Jeff that vote for approval, and then Joel voted to deny the approval. So we're 2-1 in favor, so this variance is approved. All right, so I think that takes care of item 4. Okay, thanks. Gonna get this last staff report pulled up, and we'll give a audience a second to leave the room here, and then we'll move on to item number 5. All right, so item number 5, it's a variance request to exceed the maximum number of accessory structures with regard to an already existing accessory structure for the property located at 334 Franklin Road. So that's the first variance request. The second one is a variance request for an already existing accessory structure to exceed 50% of the building, the principal building footprint for the property located at 334 Franklin Road. So we got 2 variance requests for this item as well. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 5 includes 2 variance requests related to accessory structures for the property located at 334 Franklin Road. The property is commonly known as Wyatt Hall, a National Register listed property. The parcel is zoned estate residential and is within the Franklin Road Historic District. The applicant is retroactively seeking the variances as the 2 accessory structures, one is a maintenance shed and the other a log cabin addition, were constructed but did not receive certificates of appropriateness or building permits. The first request is to exceed the number of permitted accessory structures. The zoning ordinance allows 1 accessory structure and 1 minor accessory structure per residential lot. There are 4 legally non-conforming accessory structures on the site. The maintenance shed was constructed much later and therefore exceeds the limit of accessory structures permitted on the property. The second request is for an accessory structure to exceed 50% of the principal building footprint. The log cabin is an existing legal nonconformity that was brought to the property in the 1950s by a previous owner. In 2016, the current owners added the addition to the log cabin, which made the accessory structure more than 50% of the principal building. The addition is another log cabin, which the current owners relocated to the site and connected to the existing log cabin. Staff will note that the Historic Zoning Commission did approve 2 retroactive certificates of appropriateness for the buildings included in these variance requests. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 criteria as established by the state law. The first of which requires uniqueness and shape of or topography of the lot in question, or some other extraordinary and exceptional situation which prevents the zoning ordinance to be followed as written. The subject property is a uniquely shaped, large estate residential lot of approximately 10 acres. The property includes Wyatt Hall and 4 accessory structures which were added over a long period of time and represent different time periods, and those are considered legal nonconformities. Wyatt Hall was present before Franklin Road existed, and the house does not face the roadway. There's also limited visibility of Wyatt Hall and the accessory structures from Franklin Road. However, these exceptional conditions do not mean that the property is not able to accommodate development as required under this ordinance. Therefore, staff believes this criteria is not met. The second criteria, that exceptional practical difficulties or undue hardship occur if the zoning ordinance were to be followed. The applicant has stated that additions to the historic Wyatt Hall could result in the compromise of its status on the National Register of Historic Places. For this reason, the property owner sought to add more living space to an already existing accessory structure. The maintenance shed was constructed to house equipment necessary to maintain the 10-acre lot. However, both the addition to the accessory structure and the construction of the maintenance shed were completed without a COA from the Historic Zoning Commission, nor the appropriate building permits from Building and Neighborhood Services. The additional accessory structure and larger accessory structure do not represent practical difficulties nor undue hardship. Therefore, staff believes this criteria is not met. The final criteria, that relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance. The subject property is approximately 10 acres with significant topographic change along Franklin Road to the house that causes the house and accessory structures to be out of view from the street. The large size of the lot and the significant setbacks of the buildings on the property from the road, as well as the topographic changes and landscaping, block the structures from view. Staff believes such relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and that this criteria is met. And staff would like to note that prior to the meeting, we did receive 2 public comments via email in favor of the variance request, which you were all provided via email a day before the meeting, and they are available at your seats now. Based on this analysis, staff recommends denial of the variance request because the criteria for granting a variance are not met. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, staff. The applicant's present, if you could step forward for us and state your name.
Hello, my name is Greg Gamble, representing the applicant, the Woodies, who are the owners of Wyatt Hall. Tonight we're requesting your approval on 2 variances to preserve and protect a piece of Middle Tennessee history. Wyatt Hall was added to the National Registry of Historic Structures on July 2nd of 1980. And while the historic design guidelines do allow for additions to these buildings up to no more than 50% of the building square footage of the original building, additions to Wyatt Hall would likely compromise its status on the National Registry. This certainly creates an extraordinary and exceptional situation or condition for the property owners. The strict application of the zoning ordinance would require that the Woodies grow the size of Wyatt Hall to add additional square footage for their property. The Woodies considered themselves preservationists. They seek to protect the historic integrity of Wyatt Hall. There's a great appreciation from this community for the preservation efforts of the Woodies to spend their own money and time to salvage and restore a piece of Middle Tennessee's history. The 2 log structures are also identified in the filing. They were both moved to the site and relocated in the rear yard. They have no historical association to Wyatt Hall, but they are excellent examples of Tennessee log home structures. One was used as a smokehouse, and the other as a guest house at the time they were moved to the property. Both have been since restored by the Woodies. In the 1960s, a detached garage and chicken coop were added to the rear of the home, and Wyatt Hall faces south, not toward Franklin Road, so the back of the home is actually to the north. And the reason that it's positioned that way is so that as the sun moves across from east to west, the entire house isn't heated up all at one time. So it gives tribute to kind of the architecture and the thought of the period of these longer linear homes facing to the south, so as the sun moved, it stayed cooler. In February of 2016, the Wyatts were informed of a 6-room cedar log cabin house in Lewisburg, Tennessee that was constructed by one of the founders of Lewisburg in the 1830s. This 1,133 square foot structure was scheduled to be bulldozed down to make room for a new house. The bulldozer was parked in the yard when the Woodies first arrived, and they chose to save this house, save the historic structure out of respect for the craftsmanship and the historic architecture of Middle Tennessee. The log cabin addition and the maintenance shed were located on the north end of the property adjacent to the railroad tracks. The log cabin addition is positioned approximately 155 feet from Franklin Road. The maintenance shed is located approximately 182 feet from Franklin Road and 128 feet from the adjacent neighbor's property line. Both structures are out of view from the roadway due to the elevation change of Franklin Road and are screened from the adjacent neighbor by existing trees and a property line fence. It is for these reasons that we believe that the criteria for the variances have been satisfied. There's very little, if any, risk for the creation of precedents in your approval for these variance requests. How many times in the past and how many properties even exist in Franklin where this criteria exists, where a historic home is preserved, where 5 accessory structures are constructed, and where one of them is an addition to a historic log cabin? I believe the answer is none, which speaks to the very uniqueness of this situation. The Historic Zoning Commission issued a certificate of appropriateness for the log cabin addition and the maintenance shed on August the 9th of this year. The additional structures were added to complement the character of the historic district and the gateway to historic downtown Franklin. With your approval tonight, we will immediately file building plans to the Codes Department for a building permit. All appropriate fees will be paid, and all appropriate inspections will proceed. Thank you.
Thanks. So again, before we open the public comment, we do have several speaker cards. Just keep in mind it's 7 minutes total, kind of for each side. So we can work through that, but please keep that in mind as you come forward and speak. So at this time, we'll open the public comment. And let's start. We're gonna go in order. We kind of kept them in order as people arrived. So I'll start with Mr. Alan Sims, if your president would like to come forward.
Good evening. My name's Alan Sims. I live at 119 Lewisburg Avenue here in Franklin. I'm not going to take up too much of my time, but I'm just going to look from a practicality point of view. You can't see any of those buildings that's been mentioned. They're screened. They're back in the back. I just don't see a real point in trying to adjust something that's already happened and that you can't see it from the road anyway. So that's
Okay. Thanks. So next we'll go to, it's Emily. I'll go with, okay, thank you, I appreciate that. I didn't want to mess the last name up, so.
I'm Emily McGidd, and I live at 1208 Hillview Lane here in Franklin. I first went to Wyatt Hall 23 years ago and thought, what a wonderful old home. I now went to it. It is a masterpiece. It is preservation worthy and museum quality. There you go.
Thank you. So next we'll go to Mr. Douglas Paisley.
Good evening. I'm a relative newcomer to Williamson County. I moved here in 2017 from West Virginia. And having been a West Virginian and having been employed by the Department of Transportation in West Virginia for almost 40 years, I've seen it all in West Virginia. I've only seen a little bit in Tennessee, but the comparisons are there. In West Virginia, something like this, in a situation like this, in Franklin, would raise the eyebrow. However, in our cases in West Virginia, something like this with Wyatt Hall And I've had the opportunity to be there, and I encourage you to be there, or to go see what has been done and what Dr. Woody has done there. This is a very unique situation. And I don't see a need for the removal of any of these buildings or the movement of them. Dr. Woody has, as Greg said, Dr. Woody has stated that he will comply with whatever is necessary to be able to keep the buildings there. I just want to encourage you to go and see this for yourself, in that it is such a unique situation. Thank you.
Thank you. So next we'll move to Tina P. We'll go with that, sorry.
It's Perrette.
Perrette, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Don't forget, vote Perrette. Oh, wait, that's over. Okay. Good evening. I'm Tina Perrette, 147 Clarendon Circle in Fieldstone Farms. I'm going to edit these as I go to keep it shorter, so bear with me as I jump around a little bit. So I'm a third-generation realtor. My grandfather was the president of the Illinois State Realtor Board in 1947 to 1948. I practiced real estate in Middle Tennessee for 17 years. And about 2 months ago, I had the pleasure of being invited to tour Wyatt Hall with Dr. and Mrs. Woody. And as I traveled up the driveway and the main house came into view, before I even left my car, I was struck with the sense of being in a place straight out of a Dickens novel. From the true to era, stepping inside, you are transported to life in the 1800s with no detail left out. There's no question that these owners consider it their life's work to preserve this iconic home and pay tribute to Mrs. Wyatt at every opportunity. As you look further, you notice many compromises they have made to forego the modern trappings of homes today that most of us would not be willing to live without, such as closets, walk-in showers, and large open kitchens with modern appliances. But the Woodys are unique people who are passionate about preserving this 19th century time capsule in the purest form they can achieve. And that is what has brought me to address this body tonight. In the pursuit of giving this historic Register home the life and love it deserves, and with unwavering commitment to maintain architectural authenticity, instead of adding on to the main house, the Woodys made other additions to accommodate the practical needs of caring for a unique, large acreage property and the ability to showcase their collections of all types, including historically significant local artist Matilda Loads.
Okay. We've got about 2 minutes left.
Great. It is clear and agreed that mistakes were made and proper procedures were not followed in this pursuit, and that is unfortunate, as I believe that a workable solution could have been found through the standard process. In speaking to the Woodys, I'm told their intention for when they no longer live in the home is to convert it to a site the public can access, in which case office and storage space would be decidedly convenient to have in place. What a gem this property would be for future architects to see, and perhaps even spark a new generation to devote themselves to historic preservation. Thank you for your time and your service.
Thank you. So next we'll go to it's Dr. Jerry Cluft.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jerry Cluft, and I happen to be adjacent to the Woodys' property across the street. And I've been there a little under 3 years. And I must say to you, until Sunday afternoon when the Woodys had me tour the site, I had never had any appreciation for what was in that particular location, because their tree canopy is so strong. And they've done such a wonderful job of buffering the visual aspects of what they've done from the street traffic, and especially my home, which is a 2-story, I could look into their property unlike anybody else in that particular area. I can't really embellish much more of the articulation that's already occurred, because there's been such wonderful comments about them. On the fact that I think this property has the potential, just like the Hermitage and the Belmead Mansion. This property, according to the Woodys, and it was said earlier this evening, they intend to leave it. And this could become a very, very similar site here in Franklin for that. I've only been here about 3 years, and I understand the mantra in historic city of Franklin, Tennessee, that they're great preservationists. And I think if you disturb this property in any way, you'd really drive a stake in the thought that you were violating the preservationist mantra that you embellish. and thanks. I hope
7
you
minutes
support.
is up.
Okay, thank you. So we'll keep going. We've got two speaker cards left. Want to make sure everybody who submitted one, I know we've had a couple longer items or speakers. So if we can move to Joe Mills, if you'd like to come forward.
Hello, Joe Mills. Been in Franklin for almost 30 years. I've built hundreds of structures here in Franklin, each one individual, trying to keep the authenticity of Franklin. I have never seen anything quite like the work of art that Dr. Woody has put together over on this 10-acre piece of property. The proportions are correct. Every detail is well thought out. And just like the doctor just spoke, I think it could be a treasure for a long time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the last name card I have, it's Nancy Whittemore.
Hi, I'm Nancy Whittemore. I'm a resident of downtown Franklin, and I'm going to make my comments very short because most people have already said everything that I would want to say tonight. But let me just say, I've known the Woodies for over 15 years, and I know firsthand how much they respect, honor, and love Wyatt Hall and the grounds there. Alex Woody, if those of you who've been around her, you will hear her say over and over how fortunate they are to be the caretakers of this property. I hope you'll do the right thing tonight, and I hope you'll vote to allow these structures.
Thank you. And thank you, audience, for keeping the time short. Appreciate your help with that. All right, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close public comment?
Motion made by Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, the public comment's closed. So we do have, again, on this item, there's two variance requests. So the first is to exceed the maximum number of accessory structures on the site. And then the second one is related to the building footprint, so exceeding it by 50%. So we've got, let's handle it the same way we handled the last item. Let's kind of take it one motion at a time. So let's first look at just the accessory structures. So that's the variance request to exceed the maximum number of accessory structures with regard to the already existing accessory structure on the site at 334 Franklin Road. So let's look at that item. Any questions from staff?
No questions.
Not staff, but the board. Staff may have a lot of questions for us.
No questions. I'd like to go ahead and make a motion.
Okay.
To approve the exceeded maximum number of accessory structures with regard to an already existing accessory structure for the property located at 334 Franklin Road, because I do indeed think that it meets all three criteria, including an exceptional lot, a specific piece of real estate that already has the structure there, and it's in tune with the architecture of the property, because the practical difficulty has been met, as well as the third criteria of it doesn't create any substantial detriment to the public good.
Okay, motion for approval of the variance made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. Any discussion?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll make note. It's I'm torn on this item as well. So I normally would like to see a citizen resident come forward with a building permit on the front end. So that's kind of my my concern, at least with this item. Any other discussion from you guys? Okay. So motion made for approval. We've got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, the variance is approved. The first variance is approved. So now let's move to the second one. It's a variance request for the already existing accessory structure to exceed 50% of the principal building footprint for that same property. Ready for a motion when you guys are ready.
Yeah. I'll make a motion to approve for an already existing accessory structure to exceed 50% of the principal building footprint for the property located at 334 Franklin Road. As an accessory structure, because I do indeed actually think that it meets all three criteria to grant it a variance.
So motion for approval by Joel, is there a second?
I second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, the second variance request is approved as well. All right, so you have our next item of business, it's consideration of the 2022, it's hard to believe 2021's already over, almost. 2022 BZA deadline and meeting schedule. Staff?
The calendar is before y'all on the screen.
Yeah.
It looks awesome. I don't plan much forward than about 2 weeks, so it looks great to me. Is there a motion for approval of the 2022 deadline and meeting schedule?
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? No one opposed. We love this schedule. All right, we're down to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
No one is opposed, so we are adjourned.